Teacher friends the other day came up to me and asked me how to make an attendance sheet that would automatically update when you add in new children, add in new dates, add in new classrooms, and when you updated the data. So today I'm going to show you how I did all of that in Google Sheets. Everything is dynamic, so when you update something in one place, it updates everywhere else. Skills we'll be using in today's video include making a cross-tabulated attendance spreadsheet in Google Sheets, and we'll be using such skills as data validation, conditional formatting, naming ranges, freezing rows and columns in a worksheet. We'll then take that cross-tabulated data and unpivot that into a dynamic proper data set, then use that proper data set to make a dynamic pivot table. Part 1. Create an attendance data entry spreadsheet in Google Sheets. All right, so we have our new Google Sheet. We have our new Google Sheets workbook. So let's start by making 3 sheets in this workbook. All right, I'm going to name this one. I'm going to name this sheet attendance by double-clicking on the tab name and typing in attendance. On this tab, I'm going to call this classroom list. And on this sheet, we're going to call it dataset. All right. So first, let's go to our attendance. And let's start making our data. So we want the child's name in their first row. We want the classroom they belong to. And the subsequent dates should go along in all the other columns. So let's start with today's date. And we'll click and drag and make a bunch of subsequent dates all the way up to Z. Sounds great. Let's enter in the children's names. All right. Now, we have our children's names and we want to associate them with the classroom. Now, when we have our data should always be consistent. The best way to do that is data validation. So let's say we have the names of several classrooms we need to enter. So we're going to go to our classroom list. And in our first column, we'll call this classroom. And then we'll name our classrooms. We'll call this Turkey AM class, Turkey PM class, Peacock AM class. Oh, I spelled that wrong. All right, so we have the names of our classrooms, and we want this data to be consistent. So how are we going to do that? Data validation. All right, so let's first, I like formatting my data nice in this table. So I'm going to click on A1, hit Control Shift down to select all, and hit Control Shift down again. Select all the data in the entire sheet. I'm going to go to Format. I'm going to go to Alternating Colors, and I'm going to pick the style that I want to apply to. I like this blue, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, so then I have my names, And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit bold because I like bolding the header. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to name all the range from A2 to A1000. I'm going to give it a named range. So I'm going to click on A2. Then on my keyboard, I'm going to hit Control-Shift down to select all the current data. Hit Control-Shift down again to select all the data in that range. I'm now going to go into Data. I'm going to go into Named Ranges. And I'm going to call this Named Range. Classroom List. And I cannot give named ranges spaces, so I'm just going to call this Classroom List. And I'm just going to copy it because I'm going to use that exact wording later. And I'm going to hit Done. So now when I go to attendance over here and on Classroom, I'm going to select B1. I'm going to select cell B2, hit Control-Shift down to select all the data in everything to 1000. I'm going to go to Data, Data Validation. It's going to say what's my cell range that I'm selecting, everything in B2 to B1000. I want, where is this data coming from? It's coming from a range. And that range is the classroom list. And then it's going to ask me, do I want these items to show up in a drop-down list? Yes, please. If there's any invalid data, what do I want it to do? Should it just show a warning or should it reject the input? I want it to reject the input. And then it's going to say, if there is an error, do you show validation help text? And I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say enter. Please click and enter a value from the classroom list. Hit save. All right, so now all my data has been affected, and if we go back to the top, all those arrows you can see are all the classrooms I have listed in classroom list. And if I add another classroom, we'll say, what's a fun item? We'll Meerkat AM and Meerkat PM. You can see in my list they've automatically shown up. Pretty cool, right? All right, before I enter my data, let's make sure my spelling is correct. I'm a notorious misspeller of names, so tools, spelling, spell check, and saying, okay, yep, please change those names. All right, no, we're good. So fixed all that. Now I'm up ready to apply my classroom names to the classes that they are in. All right, we don't need any more rows from 29 to 1000, so I'm just going to select all the other rows by selecting row 29, then hitting Control-Shift down on my keyboard, and then right-clicking on the rows, and I'm just going to say delete rows 29 to 1000. And if I add more rows later, the data validation will go on to the rows. If I just hit 1, add row 1, you can see the data validation just is extended. So I'm just going to hit delete 29 because I don't need to do that right now. Next, I want to create data validation for all my attendance entries. So I only want blank, 0, or 1s to be seen. So I'm going to select cell C2. I'm going to hit Control-Shift down to select everything to the bottom of the data. Then I'm still holding down Control-Shift, and I'm going to hit the right key to select all the data. I'm going to select data, and I'm going to hit data validation. And then I'm going to say I only want numbers in my criteria. And I want my numbers to be between 0 and 1. And reject input if it's not correct. Show validation help text if it's rejected. Enter a number between 0 and 1. Also say leave blank if the child was not scheduled for that day, or, and hit save. Now, if I try to hit anything that's not a 1 or a 0, it's rejected. Only 1s and 0s are now accepted in my data. I like to have alternating colors in this attendance sheet, so it helps me distinguish children's names. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on A1. I'm going to Control-Shift-A to select all of my data. I'm going to go to Format. I'm going to select Alternating Colors. And I'm going to select a style that I prefer. I'm going to select this blue right here again. And I'm going to hit Done. And then in my headers, I'm going to make them all bold. I'm going to change the coloring to white. And then all of these dates, I'm going to select on C1, hit Control-Shift-Arrow right to select all of my row data here. And I'm going to select it upright. And then I'm going to make the column smaller so it looks, so the data entry looks really clean. So I'm going to select Format, Text Rotation, and I'm going to say at an angle 90 degrees. Great. And now again, I'm going to go back to column C. Just select all of column C. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Right arrow to select all the other columns. And then I'm going to just select any random column and I'm going to make it smaller, and it'll make all the other columns smaller as well. All right, that looks very clean. To help view my data when I have more rows and columns, I'm going to freeze the top row and I'm going to freeze the first column. So I'm going to go to View, Freeze, First Row, View, Freeze, First Column. That way, as I add on more columns, as I add on more rows, all this data will continue, the top row and the first column will continue to be seen. Now, as I enter in more dates, I want to make sure I'm only entering dates. So I'm going to enter data validation into my date, into the top row as well for all the dates. So I'll go back to cell C1. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Right arrow on my keyboard. I'm going to go to Data. I'm going to go to Data Validation, and I'm going to select Criteria. Date is a valid date. Reject input, show validation help. Enter a valid date, enter a period, and hit Save. So if I enter another date in, and I hit Insert Right column, and I try anything else, it's going to be rejected. It must be a valid date. I'm going to take my data validation a step further with my zeros and ones. If a 1 is highlight, if a square anywhere in this area is changed into a 1, I want it to highlight. So again, I'm going to select cell C2. I'm going to hit Control Shift down, select everything. I'm going to hit Control Shift down until I select everything in the data, and then Control Shift right arrow to make sure everything is selected in the data entry range for my attendance. I'm going to go to Format. I'm going to click Conditional Formatting, and I'm going to say everything from C2 to Z28 if the cell is equal to 1, make it green. Sounds good. I like that. And hit done. So now any data that turns into a 1 is turned green. Everything else, when it's a 0, stays the same. And because it's data validation, I can't enter anything except a 0, 1, or blank. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill out some of my attendance data. Part 2. Unpivot, flatten our cross-tabulated table we made. All right, so we have our data set up. As a reminder, 0s are children that are absent, 1s, the children were present, and if the cell was blank, that means the child wasn't scheduled on that particular day. We're not quite ready yet to start analyzing this. Unfortunately, we can't use a pivot table on this data set. It's already a pivot table and cross-tabulated. When we try using a pivot table on the current data, we're going to have errors. Let's try it out. For example, so let's select all the data. We'll go onto cell A1, hit Control A, hit Data, and hit Pivot Table. Hit from our menu, create on a new sheet, and it's going to have a hard time figuring out what our values are and what's adding up. So nothing is going to work. Right now we're only seeing these dates. So it's hard. It can't tell what is what. To make a pivot table work, we're going to need to unpivot or flatten the data. When setting up a proper data set, we're looking for a header in the first row describing the contents of the column. Each column should contain one type of each information. It should have a consistent data format, and when possible, use data validation for items that repeat. Each row will be its own record. Each cell should contain just one value. Whole rows or columns are not empty. Of course, blank cells where the information is not known or applicable are fine. Every piece of data here needs to have its own row, represented by the child's name, the classroom, and the date. Let's look at a final example of what the data should look like. So, for every piece of data, there's a header column at the top row. Then for every piece of attendance data, for Mary in the Turkey AM classroom on 12/16, she did not attend. And then so on and so forth. For every single child, for every single date. So, how do we get from a pivoted table to an unpivoted table? If we were using Microsoft Excel, we would use Power Query. Since we're not in Microsoft Excel, we're going to be using a formula called Flatten. Let's get started. I just made the following headers in my dataset spreadsheet I made earlier in the current Google Sheets workbook. All the names in column A, all the classroom data in column B, all the date data in column C, and then the year, month, and year-month information extrapolating from the date information, and then finally in column G, our attendance data. So whenever you make a complicated formula, there's always a tendency to make errors. So you're going to see me as I write this formula. So we're going to start, and we're going to write one formula, and all the information is going to spill into here. And then whenever we update our attendance data, this sheet will automatically update. Let's begin. Equal, split, open parentheses, flatten, open parentheses, attendance. All of our information, all of our name information starts in cell A2. So start with cell A2 and include everything in column A. Now, to get our next piece of information, we need to split it. We need to connect it and split it. So we're going to use ampersand, quotation. Our delimiter is going to be the line, quotation. Connect that with everything starting in cell B2 and include everything in column B. That's our classroom information. Now we're going to get our date information. So we're going to use ampersand to connect that information. Quotation, line, quotation, ampersand. We're going to use the text formula to help format the information how we want it to look like automatically. Otherwise, we're just going to get the serial number of the date. So we're going to type in text, open bracket, open parentheses. Everything starting, our date starts in cell C1. So everything starting in C1, and look at everything just in row 1, comma, quotation, M/D/ Y, quotation mark, close parentheses. That's going to be all of our date information. Now we're going to connect it. We're going to enter in the rest of our cell information. The next information was year. So ampersand, quotation, our delimiter, quotation, connect with text, parentheses, everything starting in cell 1, include everything starting in C1, and include everything just in row 1, comma, quotation, Y, because that's our year, quotation, close parentheses, connect our delimiter, quotation, ampersand. We're going to do our month now. So again, text, parentheses, everything starting in cell 1, include everything starting in C1, include everything in that row starting from C1, comma, it's now our month, MM, comma, quotation mark, close parentheses, ampersand, quotation, line, quotation, ampersand. One more time because we want our month, our year month field. So text, quotation, start with everything in C1 to everything in row 1, comma, quotation. I want the format of that field to be Y, which the year, dash, month, close quotation mark, close parentheses. Now we have to attach the attendance data. So now ampersand, quotation mark, which is our delimiter, and then connect everything starting in cell C2. Starting in C2, go forever and ever and ever, and I'll just say go to column AAB. Doesn't exist yet, but we might get to it someday as we keep adding to this information. And now we've included all of that information, and we're going to hit close parentheses because that's the end of our flatten text. That's the end of our flatten formula. Now we're going to hit comma. We're splitting all that information by the line. The next piece of the split information asks us, are we going to split by each, whether or not to divide text around each character contained within the delimiter? We're going to say, we're going to type true. And then it's going to ask, remove empty text. We're going to type in false, because if we have empty text, we want to include it. Close parentheses. Now, because this is an array formula, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Enter at the same time to turn this information into an array formula. Control-Shift-Enter on my keyboard. Now you can see it's turned this whole formula into an array formula. And if I did everything correct after I press Enter, everything is spilled over. So now, if we look at our attendance data, everything, if we look at Mary J. Turkey Classroom on December 16th, and then all that, the year, month, and year, month is extrapolated from the date, and then she did not attend that day. Let's look. Mary J. did not attend. 12/17/1, right there. Voila. Let's look at a random piece of data. Let's go to the bottom. Ben G. So if we go all the way to the bottom, there's Ben G. And so you see his information does not start until 1/9. So you can see it's all blank, Ben G, blank, 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 until we include 1. And because this is dynamic, if we change any of the information, let's say we were incorrect and we type a 1 in the 1/8 column, and we can see 1/8 is now filled. Pretty cool. Let's make sure our information is dynamic in case we add another child. So let's add one more row. Hit add. Jessica J. Let's put her in a classroom. We'll say Meerkat AM. Let's add a couple random dates in here. Oh, good. Our data validation and our date's still working. And if we go to our data set here, Jessica J has automatically been added. Woohoo! Let's make sure if a date is entered that it's dynamic. So cell AB, right click, insert one right. Let's type in, enter a valid date, 1/11/2021. All right, let's say everyone attended. We'll give everyone a 1 on that day. And we'll put a couple zeros in just for fun. And let's see if 1/11 has been automatically entered. So let's see, Thor 1/11, Jessica 1/11, Gwen 1/11. Awesome. We now have a dynamic, proper data set based on our attendance list. Woo! That's really cool. Now we're cooking with fire. Now what we can do is turn this information into a pivot table. Part 3. Using our dynamic proper data set to create a pivot table. We have our data set, we're now ready to make our pivot table. So the first thing we're going to select all of the data in our data set. So I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard, and then I'm going to hit Control Shift down to select everything underneath it, because in case we enter any data going forward, we want that to be in our pivot table. So we did that. So now we're going to go into Data on the menu. We're going to go to Pivot Table, select it. It's going to say, where do we want our pivot table created? We want to collect on a new sheet. We're selecting everything from A1 to G1000, which is correct. We're going to hit Create. We're now ready to create our pivot table. Now in Filters, we're going to click Add, Name, and when we create our pivot table, we don't want any blank rows showing up. So what we're going to do is filter out the blank rows. So instead of showing all items in the filters, we're going to click the menu down button, click Filter by Condition, expand that, and we're going to say filter only everything that is not empty under the name column, and hit OK. So now we're only going to see in our data set, in our pivot table, we're not going to get any of this data, but rather anything that has everything that's filled, which is what we want. So back to our pivot table. So now in this pivot table, my goal is to get data, a summary of how many kids attended each month overall, and what their overall attendance percentage was. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add Rows, and I'm going to click Name. So then all the children's names are listed once in the rows. I'm going to take it a step further by grouping the children by classroom. So in rows again, I'm going to click Add by what classroom they're in, and we want the classroom first, so we're going to click and drag classroom above name. So now the children are categorized by classroom and then organized by name, which is where we want right now. We're going to quickly adjust the formatting of column A so we can see everything in there. Great. Now in our columns, we're going to want to see the month and the year. So this is where in our data set, where this year month column is going to come in for us. So instead of doing by date, we're going to do year month. So it summarizes all that data. So we're going to go under columns, add year month. So now, because we have everything in December 20th and then January 2021. So far, so good. So now we need to add the values of our pivot table, and we're going to use attendance. So right now in values, the first thing we're going to do is going to click Add, and then attendance is the sum that we're looking for. So we're going to hit attendance, and then summarize by sum, show as default, which is what we want. So now we see Jean in the Meerkat room has attended 14 days in December, attended 9 days in January, and attended 23 overall. So far, this is what we want. I want to see how many available days they could have attended. And in my attendance sheet, if we go back to it, we said zeros are ones where kids could have came, but they were absent, and blanks is where they were not scheduled at all. So I want to count everything that has a number in it. So someone like Ben G right here, I only want him counting the days that he was scheduled for. So these last 4 days right over here. And for Jessica over here in the Meerkat room, I don't want any of this calculated, but only these numbers calculated because this is when she was actually scheduled to attend. So what we're going to do is go back to our pivot table. We're going to add another value, and we're going to click on attendance again. And instead of summarize by sum, we're going to click summarize by count A. So now it counts everything, every number that's in a value. So if we look at, if we go back to our data set, we see, go back to Jessica J in the Meerkat room. So if we look at Jessica J's overall information, she attended 11 out of 16 days. If we go back to the attendance data right over here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 out of 16 days, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Perfect with what we want. And then if we look at Ben G in the Peacock classroom, he was only scheduled 4 days and he only attended 4 days, and only in the month of January. So let's go look at the Peacock AM classroom in our pivot table. Peacock AM, Ben G. He didn't attend, he wasn't scheduled for anything in December, didn't attend anything in December. In January, he attended 4 days out of the 4 days he scheduled, and overall, and his grand total was 4 out of 4. So far, so good. So now I'm going to add a calculated field to show the percentage of days attended over total possible days they could have attended. So what I'm going to do is go to my pivot table editor here on my right, under values, I'm going to click add, calculated field, summarize by custom, and the formula I'm going to use is sum attendance over count A attendance. Once I hit enter, I get the decimal version of the percent. And if we look at Ben G, who attended 0 out of 0 days, I get an error message because you can't divide by 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to nest the sum attendance over count A attendance. We're going to nest that in a 2% formula and an if error formula. So we're going to quickly copy this formula so we don't have to retype it again. And we're going to write equal. Put on my caps lock. And I'm going to write 2 underscore percent, open parentheses, if error, open parentheses. Going to paste my original formula in there. And now, comma, because we're in the if error. Now, the system thought I was automatically done, which is why I'm getting errors in all the columns. I am not ready yet. I'm at the end of my if error function, so I'm going to hit comma. If we encounter an error, I want it to say 0, close parentheses to end the if error information. And then to close the 2% function, we're going to add another close parentheses, hit enter. And now everything's automatically corrected. So now everything is changed to an automatic percent. And if we go to Ben G, it's now a 0, so we don't get the error message anymore. We're going to clean up our fields a little bit. Over here in row 3, we're going to do a little, we're going to change that format to wrap, text wrapping to wrap. And then for the sum of attendance, we're going to say days attended. And then in count A's, we're going to say days scheduled. And then in this calculated field one, we're going to call this percent of days attended. We're going to do some row freezing so we can look at all of our data. So I'm going to click on C3 right here. I'm going to go to view. I'm going to hit freeze first 2 columns. So if I'm going anywhere else, those 2 columns are always selected. And then under view, freeze, view, freeze up to row 3. All of the headers are now always in view when you scroll through your pivot table. Because of the data and formulas are dynamic, when you update your attendance data, the pivot table will automatically update as well. Thanks for watching my video today. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. Please leave me a comment if you have a better idea how to do this attendance sheet in your own way, or give me future ideas for more videos. Thanks very much, and remember, if anyone asks you how's it going, say forward, that way you're never lying.